Many of the programs that you'll be writing to process files will have to process a large amount of data, a large number of items contained in a file, or will have to save a large number of items to a file. And when this is the case, you typically use a loop to process the contents of the file. For example, I have a program here on the screen that uses a loop to write 100 random numbers to a file. And obviously, the reason we're using a loop in this program is because it would be very tedious and difficult to write 100 separate sets of statements to generate a random number and then write that random number to a file. It's much more efficient to write a loop that iterates 100 times, and then inside that loop you generate a random number and you write that number to the file. And that's what this program does. Let's take a look at it briefly. First, we import the random module. That's because we're going to be generating random numbers. And then here in this statement, we open a file named numbers.txt for writing, and we assign the resulting file object to this variable myFile. And then here's the for loop that iterates 100 times for a count in range 100. So that construction simply causes the loop to execute 100 times, and then during each iteration, here in this statement, we generate a random number in the range of 1 to 100, and we assign that to the number variable, and then here we write the number variable to the file. And if you've read in your textbook in this chapter about the process of writing multiple items of data to a text file, you'll recall that when we're writing, if we have a series of numbers that we want to write to a file, to a text file, we have to use the str function to convert each number to a string, and then we have to concatenate a new line character to the end of that. And that simply puts each number on a separate line in the file. And this is discussed in your textbook. So that loop writes 100 random numbers to the file. Then we close the file here, and then in this statement we simply print the word done on the screen so that we know that the program is done and that we have written the numbers to the file. So I'm going to go ahead and just quickly run this, and here it says done. So I'm going to go and open the file, and you can see here here's the numbers.txt file, and you can see that I have a series of random numbers, and there's 100 random numbers stored in that file. So this is an example of a program that uses a loop to write a series of values to a file. Now, it's also quite common that you need a loop to read a series of values from a file. As I mentioned earlier, you typically, when you're writing a program that processes a file, often you do not know how many items are stored in the file. Your instructor might give you a file, and your instructions are to write a program that reads all of the values from the file and do something like add all of the numbers up and get the total of the numbers in the file, or step through the file and find the largest number in the file, or find the smallest number in the file, or some similar type of a task. So you often will not know how many items are in a file, so you simply have to construct a loop that iterates once for each item in the file, and then each time the loop iterates, you read an item from the file, and then you perform some processing with it. There are actually a couple of different ways in Python to read all of the items from a file when you don't really know the number of items that are in the file. The simplest way is with the for loop, and I have an example here on the screen. We're going to just open the file that we just created, the file that contains all those random numbers, and we're going to read all of the random numbers from that file and display them. So in this statement, we are opening the numbers.txt file, opening it for reading, and we're assigning the resulting file object to the myFile variable. And then here, beginning in this line, we have a for loop. Now let's take a closer look at this. For line in myFile. Now, line is a variable, and of course myFile is the file object. The way that the for loop will work is that it will iterate once for each line in myFile. Every time the loop iterates, it will read a line from the file, and it will assign that line as a string to the line variable. So the first time the loop iterates, the line variable will be assigned to the first line in the file. The second time the loop iterates, the line variable will be assigned the second line in the file, and so forth. And this loop automatically knows the number of items that are in the file. It will stop when it reaches the end of the file. So each time the loop iterates, we call the print function, passing line as an argument. So we're simply printing all of the lines in the file. When we run this program, we're just going to see all those numbers displayed one after the other. And then the last thing that the program does is that it closes the file. Okay, so let's run this program and see if it works. And there is the output. I can scroll the window here to show you that we do have a long series of numbers. One thing that you'll notice is that we have an extra line printed between each one of the numbers. We have a blank line basically printed between all of the numbers. And the reason that that's happening in this particular program is that over here, when we read a line from the file, the new line character that is at the end of the line is read with everything else on that line. So the line variable is going to reference a string that ends with a new line character. When we print that string, the new line character causes the output position to be advanced to the next line. Well, the print function also prints a new line character automatically at the end of each line, unless you tell it specifically not to. So when we run this, we're getting two new line characters, one after the other. That's something to be aware of when you're processing files this way. Now, there are a number of ways to handle that if you don't want those blank lines appearing there. One way is to strip the new line character from the string that is read from the file. And there's a discussion in your textbook on how to do that. But in this program, really all that we're doing is we're just displaying the data from the file. So perhaps an easier way to handle it is to tell the print function not to print a new line. That way we only get one new line printed. So the way that we do that is to say end equal and then specify an empty string as the ending character. So when we run the program now, we should see that list of numbers without the blank lines displayed between them. And that's what happens. Now, this use of the for loop is the easiest way to read data from a file in Python. But if you're going to go on in your studies and learn other programming languages, it's possible that you'll have to do this in a different way. Not all programming languages provide something as simple as this. Most programming languages require that you open a file and then that you have a loop that reads each of the items from the file and then that it manually tests to make sure that you have not reached the end of the file. Most languages don't provide a mechanism that automatically knows when it's reached the end of the file. That's something you have to test for. So let's look at an example of how we do that in Python. here in this program, we're going to do the same thing that we did in the previous program. We're going to open the numbers.txt file, and we're going to read all of the lines from the file and display them on the screen. So in the this first statement here, we call the open function to open numbers.txt, and we assign the resulting file object to my file. Then in this statement, we go ahead and we read the first line from the file. Line equal myfile.readLine. Now, the readLine method, when it successfully reads a line from the file, it will return that line as a string. But what if the file didn't contain any data? What if it was an empty file? Well, when the readLine method cannot read anything from the file, it returns an empty string. So after this statement executes, the line variable will either be assigned a string of data that was read from the file, or it will be assigned an empty string indicating that there was nothing to read from the file. So then we get to the while loop. While line does not equal an empty string. Okay? So if line is assigned some value that was read from the file, we're going to print that line, and you'll notice that I'm suppressing the print function's new line character. We're going to print that line, and then here we have a statement that says line equal myfile.readLine. So we're going to read the next line from the file. And then the last thing that we do is we close the file. Now, before I run that, let me go back over the logic that we're doing here. We open the file, we read the first line from the file, and then we have a while loop that says while line does not equal an empty string, print the line, and then read the next line from the file. So the loop here is going to continue to iterate until at some point when we execute this statement, we will actually be past the end of the file. The readLine method will return an empty string, and then when the loop starts over again, line will be equal to the empty string, so the loop will stop. So this loop simply will keep going until we've reached the end of the file. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this program, and as you can see, we have a list of all the numbers that were read from the numbers.txt file.